and welcome to our YouTube channel. Today we'll be starting a new series, an interesting series for that matter, Metabolism of Carbohydrates. To be a long series, but then it will be fun, it will be enjoyable, and of course, I believe it can be way easier. Now let's start. Today we'll be doing overview of the metabolism of carbohydrates. Overview of the metabolism of carbohydrates. Now, what is metabolism? What is metabolism? The idea, like in a broad term, it involves metabolism encompasses two words, anabolism and catabolism. While anabolism is build up, catabolism is breakdown. So ideally, when we mention metabolism of carbohydrates, what I want into your mind is, how is the carbohydrate meal, the food I take in, broken down, and how is it utilized by the body for the end product, of course, which is energy. So how is the carbohydrate food I take in metabolized by the body? That is, how is it broken down and how is it being utilized for energy, which is the ultimate thing we do. Now, in our overview today, metabolism is broadly divided into three stages, not just for carbohydrate, but almost every single metabolism of any biomolecule you can think about is the same pattern. Three stages. Now, stage one is usually digestion and absorption. So you will break down the heavy food in the stomach, and then, so in the GIT, must not be in the stomach, in the GIT. And after they are broken down in the GIT, they are now carried out. They are now carried out from the GI tract to the blood, a process called absorption. Now, after they are carried into the blood, from the blood, the first target in the blood is, from the blood, the first target is the liver. So they are now carried to the liver by way of, the blood vessel in question is called the portal venous system. And then from the liver, it's now circulated to other parts of the body where they are utilized for energy. So broadly, what I've said so far is that generally we have our GI tract, which of course is a tube. So that means it has a lumen and a wall. Now, when I take in large food substances, in this case carbohydrates, in large quantities, these carbohydrate molecules are broken down into tiny molecules which can be absorbed. These tiny molecules, so from large to tiny, this process whereby I break a large complex food substance into simpler forms is called digestion. So where does digestion occur? Within the tract. Now, after digestion has happened, these food substances are now absorbed into the blood. So we now have the blood vessels outside. So these food substances are now absorbed into the blood. So what's absorption? Just transportation of this food towards the blood. So from the GI tract, so transportation of digested food substances or nutrients from GI tract to blood is called absorption. So after absorption has happened, we are done with the first phase of metabolism. Now the next phase of metabolism is that this guy is now transported in blood to the liver, an organ called the liver. Now by the time it gets to the liver, of course the system here is called the portal venous system. Is carried to the liver, portal vein. So the hepatic portal vein, specifically the name is hepatic portal vein. So from the GIT, the blood vessel carries into the liver. Now within the liver now, okay, what you brought in, there's a lot of glucose. Let me use carbohydrates since that's what we are dealing with. Okay, I brought in food, the carbohydrate is too much. Immediately after a meal, the body will store more of the carbohydrates. And if I bring in glucose, the glucose will be stored. And once they are stored, they will be stored as glycogen. A process called glycogenesis. So after digestion has occurred, the next step we said happens is absorption, where these digested food substances are transported into the blood from the GIT. Now from within the blood, they are carried by hepatic portal vein, a particular portal venous system called hepatic portal vein, and they are carried to the liver. Now within the liver is very important in that it helps to regulate the amount of these nutrients that are distributed to the body. So what does the liver do? For example, after a meal, there is excess glucose. So the liver will store the excess as glycogen, a process I call glycogenesis. Now, also, if the digested food substances, which we'll mention this later when we do digestion and absorption in our following videos. Now, after digestion has occurred, if we had fructose, galactose, they will be converted to glucose and ultimately stored. Now, any glucose After I've stored some amount, which is like the excess glucose, the other amount will now be returned into blood. So from the liver, we have another vein leaving the liver, and that's called hepatic vein. Blood is now carried out, and as blood is being drained, the other nutrients like glucose, majorly since we are dealing with carbohydrates, is now carried in blood. The target of veins, every single vein carries blood from the target tissues back to the heart. So blood is now carried to the heart. Blood is carried to the heart. So blood is now carried to the heart. Now from the heart, blood will leave the heart, and then they will be circulated to different cells in the body. They will be circulated to different cells in the body, or different tissues in the body. Now, the tissues of concern, of course, every single cell in the body requires glucose. Every single cell in the body makes use of glucose. Now, at those target cells, glucose is carried into the cells by means of glucose transporters. So I have series of carrier proteins that help to transport glucose into cells. Of course, from the name, we've learned before that is facilitated diffusion. So they are now carried with inside the cell, glucose transporters. And of all of them, the most important is GLUT4. The one of concern is GLUT4, which is insulin dependent. So it depends on insulin, and it helps to carry glucose. And its main locations are skeletal muscles, heart muscle, and adipose tissue. Skeletal muscle, heart muscle, that's cardiac tissue, and adipose tissue. Now, within the cells, these glucose are being used. Within the cells, these glucose are being used for energy. And of course, we know the natural way a cell should be an animal cell. Animal cell should have a nucleus, and then it should have mitochondria. It should have cell organelles. So apart from the nucleus, so I will call this my nucleus. Now I'll call this my mitochondria. So apart from nucleus and mitochondria, within here, I'll have my cytoplasm. And of course, the fluid of the cytoplasm is called cytosol. So some people use it interchangeably. Now, within these cells, each of the cell, you realize that after they are transported by glucose transporters, within the cells, these guys are used up for energy. And the first process, which is like stage 2, which is the stage 2 of metabolism, is that within the cytoplasm, that's the cytosol, a process occurs which we call glycolysis, whereby the glucose that has entered the cell is converted into a molecule we call pyruvate. Of course, we'll learn more about this in this series. But glucose is converted to pyruvate, and the pyruvate is now carried into the mitochondria, where it is used for energy. And please, that happens only in the presence of oxygen. So to be carried into the mitochondria, and then it does the third phase, which is Krebs cycle and electron transport chain, which will ultimately release more and more energy. So like we said from the start, in summary, what have we said? That metabolism is just the process whereby food substances, in this case carbohydrates, are being broken down and then are utilized for the ultimate what we have, which is energy. Ultimate function, which is energy. Now, when you look at it, for example, carbohydrate food, when taken in, the food is complex, it's heavy at first, broken down into tiny particles, a process called digestion. And after it is broken down, it is now carried into blood, a process called absorption. But take note that it's only digested food that is carried into blood. Now circulated by hepatic portal vein to the liver. Now from the liver, carried away by hepatic vein to the heart. And from the heart, it is circulated to the other cells of the body. Every single cell. Of course, when I mentioned GLUT4, that was for the main places. The heart, for the brain, for example, uses GLUT1. But we now carry it into the cells. In each of these cells, within a cell, we have the cytosol. That's where glycolysis occurs. A process called glycolysis will occur. And then glucose is converted to pyruvates and energy is produced. Energy is produced, but it's few. Now, for the body to produce more energy from this glucose, it ensures that the pyruvate is carried into the mitochondria only in aerobic respiration when there's oxygen, and then two different processes happen, which is Krebs cycle and electron transport chain. Electron transport chain is also called oxidative phosphorylation. Now, whereby people will form NADs and FADs. We'll mention them later. People that will form from Krebs cycle and people that we form from glycolysis are used to form ATP. And that's that for that. So I'll see you in our next video where we'll start up with digestion and absorption of carbohydrates.